If countries actually paid their debts, the global economy would collapse overnight. Banks would fail. Markets would freeze. Governments would go bankrupt. So they don't. Instead, they use a system so subtle, most people never notice it, but you feel it every single day. You've probably heard that governments owe trillions, and maybe you've asked yourself, who do they even owe that money to? But the real question is, how do they plan to pay it back? Because the answer to that question determines what happens to your money, your salary, and your future. Most people assume debt works like this. You borrow money, and then you pay it back. That's how it works for you. That's how it works for businesses. But for countries, it's different. Global debt is now in the hundreds of trillions. There is no realistic path where all of that gets repaid the normal way. If governments tried, taxes would skyrocket, economies would shrink, and political systems would collapse. So why don't countries just default? Why not admit they can't pay and reset the system? Because default is not a reset. It's a chain reaction. If one major country defaults, banks lose money, pension funds collapse, currencies crash, trade freezes, and suddenly, it's not just one country. It's the entire global system. So instead of defaulting, governments choose a different path. They print more money. Not always directly, but through central banks, stimulus, liquidity programs. And here's what that does. When more money enters the system, each unit of money becomes worth less. The debt doesn't disappear, but its real value shrinks. It becomes easier to repay, because the money itself is worth less. Imagine you owe 100,000 euros. Now imagine over time, the value of money drops by half. You still owe 100,000 euros, but in real terms, you're paying back much less. That's exactly what governments are doing, just on a massive scale. But this is where it gets important, because someone pays for that difference, and that someone is you. If you hold cash, it loses purchasing power. If you rely on a salary, it usually rises slower than inflation. But if you own assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, they often rise with inflation or even faster. So wealth doesn't disappear, it gets redistributed. This isn't just inflation, it's a hidden form of default. Instead of governments saying, we can't pay our debt, they make the money worth less, until the debt becomes manageable. Quietly, gradually, without triggering collapse. And here's the real problem. Once this process starts, it's very hard to stop, because the system depends on it. More debt requires more money creation, which leads to more inflation, which leads to more pressure. It's a loop. Countries don't default. They just make sure your money does. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you can decide which side of that system you want to be on.